Now we are going to use this PowerPivot for Excel real quick like. So I'm going to create another sheet. This is sort of my last topic that I want to cover. If I go to File, Open, Browse, we're going to open up a file called, one of these here, this is Power BI DB. This is Power BI DB 1. This is just a database. I could use an Access database, but this is work fine. Okay, so I have a customers table, an orders table, an order details. So this is like a database of a dump of information. Now, if I create a pivot table from this, I can go to Insert, create a pivot table. But that's going to create a pivot table from this sheet only. The problem is I want to include this orders as part of the pivot table. So I want to create a pivot table that crosses over both of these sheets. And so I'm going to show you the way to do it through the PowerPivot tool that will work every time. There's different ways of doing this. I kind of outline those in the book, so I don't know if you have an interest in this or not, but it's important for you to at least see this capability. So if you ever have a need to bridge across different tables, you can do that. So we're going to go to our PowerPivot tool. I don't have the menus up here, it looks like. So I'll go through my options. If you added it in, you might have those options in there. There's my Power View. Here's my PowerPivot. So I just had that menu turned off. Turn it on. There's my PowerPivot tool. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a relational database based on all these tables down the bottom. So I'm going to start with my customers table. I'm going to click on this option called Add to Model. I'm going to add the customers table to the PowerPivot model, they call it. So click on the customers table, add that to the model. It's going to highlight everything, make sure this is checked, and say OK. And it adds it to this PowerPivot model. Now I'm going to come back to the orders table, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add that to the model. Add to model. Make sure this is checked. And it adds the table too as a model. Go to my order details. I'm going to add that to the model. Then I'm going to go to my products and add that to the model. So now I've got my 4 tables in the model here. Now I have to determine the relationship of how these are tied together. So if I come over to my data view, you can see it's going to display all 4 tables, but it doesn't show how they're related. But the customers table, this is the customers table, that's going to be tied through the order ID, through this method right here. So if I drag that over and drop it there, it creates a little link between the two. The order table, the common field is going to be the order ID. That's in both. So I'm going to drag that across, get the order ID. Then this one here is going to be the product ID. I'm going to tie those together. So I just created a relational database and told the table how these tables are related, what fields they're supposed to be tied to. Now that I create this table, I can look at this, go to my design, I can look at my relationships, and it shows me some more detailed screens of how the relationships are. So the first step is to really tie these together in a relational database structure, and then we just simply create our pivot table. So if you come out to the top here and you see I want to create a pivot table from this relational database structure, it creates my pivot table. It says, do you want to use a new worksheet? Yes. And it actually puts all 4 tables in. A normal pivot table wouldn't do this. You have to use the PowerPivot features in order to bridge across these tables. So if I put the customer name in the row section here, and I come down into the order section, and I put in the order amount, into the values, see this information is tied. It's coming up and telling me how much this customer has ordered, the total amount of orders. But see, it's bridging across both tables to get this information. A normal pivot table wouldn't do that. It would only work on a single database. So if you do extract things from a database, you want to be able to have the ability to bridge across those databases to find the information you're looking for. If I come out of here and go to File, Close, I'm going to close this off. I'm going to open up the file again. Now, if I just did it from this level here, and I just simply created my pivot table, insert pivot table, okay, my pivot table. But you see, it doesn't include the tables over here. See? I can put my table in here. I can put in my customer name in here, but I can't put the orders because I don't have that information. So the way I showed you a minute ago, which is creating that relationship table through adding a model, is the most accurate way to do it. It's changed over the years, but I could actually come down here and say, I want to actually add more tables. So the more tables then, it says, okay, you want to add more tables? You want to create a new table? You say yes. It's not letting me bridge them across, see it? So say, no, I don't create a new table out of that, but I have to actually somehow bridge them across. And so therefore, in order to bridge them across, I have to create a model out of this. So at that point, let me see if I can do this one more time. If I do, sometimes it comes up with a little message up on top that allows you to kind of connect them up, but it didn't this time. So again, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, I can come over to here and I can simply say add to my model, and I can simply create the customers, add that to the model, and then I can simply say, so it already had the customers table in there, see it? So I messed it up, so that's fine. But you get the idea that you'll have to come back at some point and create the model and bridge these across so that you can actually bridge them across this way. So if I go to here, create my model, and then I want to create the relationship between these, I can come up to the range. I'll take customer ID. I'll put it over to this one here, because this was an extra table I didn't really need. Then I can close this off. But if I come back to my pivot table, it's still not letting me do it. So, oh, there it is. I did that time. See it? So then it came back, and once I had the model created, it bridged them across. So you have to go back to the model and create this relationship model to bridge these items across so you can actually pull across. Now that I have the secondary table here, I can pull out my order amount and create it. So it's much easier to kind of create it from the beginning when you first know that you have to build relationships between tables, and this is going to give me some accurate information. So if I didn't have this thing bridged across like that, then I would get inaccurate information. Even if I went over here, let me see if I can break that link. Let's see, I'm going to go to manage the model, and I'm going to go to the sign. Let's switch over this way. I think I can do it this way. I click on that link and delete it. So if I delete that link, it's no longer there. See what it gives me? It doesn't know that the information, how they're tied together. And so it's giving me all the information, the total of all the orders table, because it doesn't know how to parse that out or grab those specific records from the database. This record here, it can't find that information because we don't have that relation. Now, it does come back and ask me, do I want to auto-detect these relationships? In the older versions of Excel, you didn't have this option. But in this version, you can actually go through and auto-detect it. So if I say auto-detect, it goes out and finds that relationship and makes the connection for you automatically. But again, if that doesn't work, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. If I'm bridging from the customers table to the products table, it might not find that connection. So you'd have to go through and build that model first. So the more accurate way to do it would be to simply build the model first, build the relationships first, and then go create your pivot table, and then you'll have everything working properly. And since I did this automatically, it's possible that it may have grabbed the wrong relationship. It may have grabbed the wrong field that related. And so that way, if you do it yourself, then you'll know that it's going to work 100%. And if you do it yourself, then that will work in all versions of Excel. But when you start using these auto-generate features, then those are different in different versions. Sometimes they work better in some old versions. Sometimes they're not even available in some of the older versions, like 2010 is not even available. You have to link them up manually. And so it's like I said, that's sort of changed over the years. It's sort of evolving type thing. And it's getting better and better all the time. And so it's almost like they're trying to make it so it's transparent that it just comes back and says, you want to auto-detect them? You say yes. Then you won't have to understand all this relationship thing behind the scenes, but it seems to work. But the question is it giving you the right answer? So the more accurate way to create the model first, and that way you won't have to worry about whether it's giving you the right answer or not. You know that it's lined up properly. Now, in this particular field, there is another feature called KPIs and measures. A measure is, this is a measure here. If I put in a range, or I put in something like a title in here, something like this, these are called measures. These are not calculations. So this is a measure, which is a combination of this field compared to this field, and it's giving me the total of that value. So it's not just a normal calculation. It's a measure is something that's a cross-section between those two fields. So it's a little bit more complicated than just a normal formula. But that's what a measure is. But so you can go through and create your own measures, and this uses what's called the DAX program language. I mentioned that earlier, to actually do this. And a lot of the DAX program language is very similar to Excel, but there are some additional capabilities that they have behind the scenes of the DAX program language. And that's a whole other world in itself too. I'm not sure if I don't think you have an interest in that. But again, when you get into the programming side, what's nice about this is I can create what's called KPIs. If you understand how to create measures, then you can understand how to create KPIs. A KPI would be an indicator. Let me just show you a couple of pictures of this. I won't go into this in any more detail, but I want to show you a couple of ideas of what a KPI does and what the capabilities are of KPIs. So this is a KPI. So it's a pivot table that has some hierarchies here, and this is the KPI here. So basically, it's an indicator based on something. So this is sales per contracted hour status. If it's a certain range, then it turns yellow, green, and red. And that's based on a measure. So you create the measure formula, and then you would apply the KPI to the measure. And so you get some pretty interesting indicators, whether this is correct or not. See, here's some of the interfaces we use for this. So I'm not going to go into this in any more detail than this, but let me see if I had another example here. There's an example here. This was another example that you can do this. So I do go through these procedures in great detail. Here's how to create a KPI. I should give you some examples and take you through the step-by-step approach to do this. Then I have another example of that here of how to create a measure and a KPI. And so I go through some step-by-step examples to do this. It's not something that a lot of people do, but if you do a lot of pivot tables, then might want to venture into this area a little bit more to really have some real statuses and some indicators to really make your pivot tables very powerful. I teach a class out of Ireland that is called Advanced Pivot Tables. And the people that come to the class are usually experienced pivot table users. They use them all the time, and they have come with specific questions. And these are the kind of things they would ask about. They would be extremely interested in this, because they deal with these pivot tables all the time. And have a little indicator pop up would be very valuable for them based on some status mark or something like that. So there are some people that have an interest in this, and I guess if you got into pivot tables, at least you can go through the procedures, figure this out, and come up with some ideas of how to actually generate a KPI indicators. Okay, so that is what a PowerPivot tool is. It's a pretty big chapter. There's a lot involved with it. I've given you the basics of using it, so it is quite extensive. You can see there's a lot of capabilities in here. So, I don't think we have to go any more than that, but this just showing you these are the advanced features that make Excel very, very powerful. Having a relationship between these is the key. And then also having Power Query is another very powerful feature that you need to understand to get your data and have it refresh automatically. And then these two products is what they used, and they pulled those out of Excel and created the Power BI product. And so those are just some of the sort of advanced things that I think that are helpful to know. I don't think the Power Query should be advanced. I think it is going to become more mainstream at some point, as soon as everybody really understands what it's capable of, because I think it is extremely useful to be able to get your data and filter that data, and so that you can filter out the junk, stuff you don't really need in your Excel sheet. So our databases are getting very large these days, and so we need to clean out that junk before we bring it into Excel.